And now we are going to talk about the Walksnail system, which is a thing that Walksnail can do that DJI, as far as we know, can't do.
That is correct. That is correct. We have not seen a range test yet on the new O3 system, but what we do have is a new test of the Walksnail system by Wesley Vardy, the man who took it to 31 kilometers before, has now taken it to a 40-kilometer limit. 40 kilometers. He turned around because he had to get back to work.
Yeah, so he could have gone further.
Yeah, he could have. It seems like he could have gone further. He just sort of like gave up, you know.
Well, and the reason this is significant is because the V2 DJI system has a range limit at 13.3 kilometers. It just stops working, and we don't know exactly why or how. It's not. There's no GPS in the unit, so there's no way it actually knows your distance to home. It's estimating it like based on latency or something, and for some reason it just cuts out. So it's just a non-starter for long range. And what this shows is that Walksnail is viable for true long range because, as far as we can tell, as long as you put bigger antennas on it, and you could just fly as far as you have signal.
Yeah, pretty cool stuff. Good to see. Good to see.
Yes.
People keep asking, like, "Oh, is there a limit?" And so far, I mean, 40 kilometers is longer than I think almost anyone is going to fly their stuff. So
yeah, we don't know if the O3 DJI system has such a limit. As far as I know, no one's tested it, but DJI is a little bit. They're a little worried about like governments and security agencies being mad at them. So wouldn't be surprised to learn that there was such a limit, just so you couldn't fly all the way across the world and get into trouble and then get DJI in trouble. So, all right, somebody get Wesley Vardy an O3 Air unit so he can test it. All right. We talked about DJI and we talked about Walksnail. So who's that leave?
Walksnail, because we got one more Walksnail story. There's a FatShark has announced a Walksnail box goggle.
I'm sorry, I screwed up the titles.
So the Recon HD, again with the bad naming, I feel like they really got to figure out new names for their products. But the Recon HD is being launched, and this is going to be a built-in avatar system, Walksnail system. To a 3.5-inch panel, 1080p, 44-degree FOV, but 60 frames a second. It's going to be a little bit of a loss there. It sounds like you can only fly in that 60 frames a second mode. But otherwise, kind of interesting. $279.99 right now for pre-order. Through Rotor by another retailer. So kind of interesting. $279.99. What do you think of $280 for these box goggles? What do you think?
This is a tough one. So I should say Rotor Riot sent me a set and I reviewed them, so I have them. So when I reviewed them, here was my thinking: you could get a set of Skyzone Cobra X goggles for $250, which is one of the best analog box goggles you can get. And so it feels like $260 to $280 for a high-end set of analog. Like, it's 1080 resolution on the screens. That's high-end for box. That's high-end. It's hard to say high-end box goggles. Feels kind of wrong, but that's what these are. It feels like that's the price where box goggles of this spec come in, and that's with an analog receiver, right? Nobody thought that the Cobra X was a bad deal at $260, and that's with an analog receiver. So now you're going to give me essentially the same goggle, but with a Walksnail receiver, which is objectively a more expensive piece of hardware. And you could say, okay, that's fine. But only being able to do 60 FPS is a shame because it means you're stuck at that higher latency mode. I don't know.
I think my biggest caveat here is they did the same thing they did on the Dominator HDs, and they didn't give you any other option for input.
Of course they did.
All these needed is an aux jack and an HDMI in, and they would suddenly be an amazing option, personally.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, 60 frames isn't the best, but it's something, and it's a $280 box goggle with a VRX inside of it.
Absolutely.
Like, I think there would have been a niche bracket there, and you could have found a much bigger audience by tacking on $20 or $30 worth of hardware, whatever at the most, right? Whatever it would have cost to add those components. So, it is unfortunate that they didn't do that, and I think it's a single solitary piece of hardware that you can't do anything else with at 280. I think it's a little harder sell for me, especially 60. If this was 100, easier sell. If this was like had inputs, easier sell. But I think for me, we're just on the edge of like,
I mean,
I don't see the value. I don't see the value.
The Sky Zone Cobra X's, which are analog goggles, have an HDMI input.
Exactly.
So you have the option to do other things with them. If you compare these goggles to the standalone VRX, well, now, I mean, obviously the standalone VRX doesn't technically exist yet as a product that you can hold in your hands.
I think they've said $199 is the like
right.
the VRX standalone price later, like once they're out of all the sales.
You still have to figure out what kind of goggles or display you're going to use, so you're going to spend more money. Yeah. The kind of person who's going to buy this is a person who is 100% committed to Walksnail. They're not interested in analog, or maybe they have a separate set of analog goggles. They don't mind that this is dedicated, and they want to get into Walksnail. This is the lowest price point to get into Walksnail, unless you have another set of goggles already.
I have a question. I don't own Walksnail, so maybe you can tell me, how does spectating work on Walksnail?
It doesn't. It's in the menu, but it does. It didn't. They're working on it.
So let's say this: if they get spectator, then this might be a good spectator set, right?
Yeah, could see it.
Right, because then if you have like a spouse or another person, or you want to ride along, and you don't want to spend there's no reason to spend like $199 plus another goggle.
But here's the thing:
there might be a world where you spend $280, right?
Since you have HDMI out with Walksnail, you don't really need spectator goggles. You could just use a television.
It's also true, but you have to buy the VRX. That's what I'm saying. So I guess you could split it.
You don't. You just plug your goggles into the television.
Right, but what I'm saying is, I see, and you do both. So your other person gets to watch while I see.
I mean, you can do that. You could do that. Yes. You don't need a dedicated set of goggles with a separate receiver. You just use the HDMI out. I think that's why they haven't prioritized audience mode very much, because they kind of have a solution.